Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
Hello.
I never expected a simple medical test to tear my world apart. Started with my youngest, Liam. He had been getting frequent colds, his immune system seemingly weaker than the other kids. The pediatrician recommended a genetic panel, something that could rule out hereditary conditions just to be safe. It made sense. My family had a history of autoimmune disorders, and we didn't want to take any chances. That's how it began. A harmless test. Precaution. My wife, Emily, didn't question it. She even suggested that we all do a full genetic workup just to be thorough. Might as well, she said with a casual smile over breakfast. I mean, knowing our ancestry could be cool too, right? I nodded, not giving it much thought. At that moment, she was just my wife, my partner of 12 years, the woman I had built a family with. There was no tension in the air, no sense of foreboding. Just a normal family taking a proactive step toward our health. The test kits arrived in the mail a few days later. Simple saliva swabs, sealed and shipped back in prepaid envelopes. The kids thought it was hilarious, making exaggerated gagging noises as they spit into their vials. Emily laughed along with them, tousling their hair and teasing me for taking mine so seriously. "Relax, Mr. Scientist," she joked, nudging my arm. "It's not an exam." If only she knew. The results that broke me. 3 weeks later, the email arrived. "Your results are ready." I opened the link, more curious than anything. I expected a breakdown of percentages, maybe a surprise ancestry detail or two. What I did not expect was the glitch in the system. Under Liam's profile, it said, "No paternal match." Under Emma's profile, our middle child, "No paternal match." And under Noah, my oldest, "No paternal match." The words blurred on the screen. I felt my breath slow, my heart thudding so hard I could feel the pulse in my throat. It had to be a mistake. A glitch. A lab mix-up. I refreshed the page. Logged out, then back in. Even checked the fine print. But it was still there, staring me in the face. Not a single one of my children was biologically mine. My hands shook as I pulled up Emily's results. They were there, clear as day. All 3 children were a genetic match to her. So where the hell was my DNA? The desperate search for an explanation. I stood up from my desk, suddenly dizzy, nauseous. The walls of my home office felt like they were closing in, the air too thick. This was a mistake. It had to be. I grabbed my phone, barely aware of what I was doing, and dialed the testing company's customer support. The woman on the other end spoke in a bright, robotic tone, unaware that my entire life was unraveling. "Sir, our lab has strict processing protocols," she said after checking my case. "There's no indication of an error with your results." "That's impossible," I said, voice shaking. "There has to be a mix-up. I want a retest. I need another." "Sir, I understand this is surprising." She cut in, suddenly more sympathetic. "But our genetic accuracy is 99.99%. If you'd like, you can do an independent test, but these results are highly unlikely to be incorrect." The phone nearly slipped from my fingers. 99.99%. That wasn't a lab mix-up. That wasn't a clerical error. That was fact. My children weren't mine. Keeping it together, for now. Emily was in the kitchen when I walked in, humming as she made sandwiches for lunch. The kids were in the living room, watching TV, oblivious to the storm forming inside their father. I stood in the doorway for a second, my whole body tense. I could have confronted her right then and there, demanded answers, shouted, but I didn't. Instead, I forced my voice to be calm, even. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. "I need to step out for a bit. Can you handle the kids for a few hours?" She barely looked up, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Of course. Everything okay?" I hesitated. The words "no, nothing is okay" sat on my tongue. Instead, I nodded. "Yeah, just need to clear my head." She smiled at me. The same easy smile I'd fallen in love with years ago. A smile I no longer recognized. The second test. I drove to a reputable clinic downtown, where I requested a private, independent DNA test. This time, I wasn't taking any chances. I swabbed my cheek, had the samples taken under medical supervision, signed the necessary paperwork, my hands still trembling as I did so. As I left the clinic, I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. If the second test confirmed it, then what? I exhaled slowly, feeling like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the abyss of my marriage. I didn't know what I would do next. All I knew was this: nothing would ever be the same again. I barely slept that night. Lying in bed next to Emily, I could hear her slow, even breathing, the same peaceful rhythm I had listened to for over a decade. But tonight it sounded different, deceptive. Every breath she took felt like a quiet reminder of the truth she had been hiding from me for years. I had to fight the urge to roll over and stare at her, to demand she wake up and tell me what the hell was going on. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, feeling like a man who had been dropped into someone else's life. The test from the online company could have been a mistake. But the second one, the one I took at a medical clinic, if that confirmed it, then my wife wasn't just a liar. She was a master of deception, the confirmation of a nightmare. The second set of DNA results arrived 5 days later. I sat in my car in the clinic parking lot, my laptop open on the passenger seat, hands trembling as I clicked on the email. I already knew what it would say, but somehow seeing it in cold, hard medical terminology made it worse. Patient. My name. Child 1, no paternal match. Child 2, no paternal match. Child 3, no paternal match. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached. There it was. Undeniable proof. I was not the father of any of my children. The seat beneath me suddenly felt too small, the air inside the car too thin. I forced myself to take deep breaths, but nothing stopped the rage, the nausea, the humiliation from clawing its way up my throat. How long? How long had she known? Who? My stomach twisted as I realized that was the next question. If I wasn't their father, then who the hell was? The memories that suddenly made sense. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. Little moments that never seemed important before but now stood out like neon warning signs. The times she shut down conversations about the kids' early years. I had always asked about the night Noah was born. She had been rushed to the hospital while I was away on a work trip. By the time I arrived, she was already in recovery, and I was handed a tiny, fragile baby swaddled in blue. I never questioned it. I just held him, overwhelmed with love. The subtle changes in her behavior. I remembered the year Liam was born, our youngest. How she suddenly stopped initiating intimacy for months after. She had blamed stress, hormones, exhaustion. I had believed her. The small, nervous reactions whenever I mentioned genetics. Once, a year ago, Emma had asked about her eye color, why she had green eyes when I had brown and Emily had blue. I had laughed, trying to explain recessive genes, but Emily had changed the subject so fast it felt like she was running from something. She knew. Not just about one child. She knew about all of them. She had lied to me for over a decade. A slow-burning paranoia. I spent the next week moving through my life like a man caught in a slow-motion car crash. I looked at my children differently. Not with less love, no, never that, but with a strange detachment, as though I was an outsider looking in. I caught myself watching them too closely, searching for features that might connect them to someone I knew. A friend? A coworker? A stranger? Emily sensed something was wrong. She would catch me staring at her across the dinner table. My fork paused mid-air. She would ask, "You okay?" with a small, wary smile. I always forced a reassuring nod. Yeah, just work stuff. I wasn't okay. And this wasn't just work stuff. The next step, a secret search for the truth. I couldn't confront her yet. Not without more information. Not without proof beyond the DNA test. I started going through old photo albums, scanning pictures from each child's birth. Who was around? Who was always in the background? I found myself checking our financial records. Old credit card statements. Late-night ATM withdrawals. Expensive hotel stays that had no explanation. The deeper I dug, the more patterns I noticed. One name kept showing up. Mark. My best friend. A man who had been in my life for years. A man who had been there for every major moment in my children's lives. A man who had never once had kids of his own. I scrolled through my phone, finding an old picture of the two of us. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp hazel eyes. I glanced at the photo, then at a picture of Noah. Hazel eyes. My blood ran cold. The burden of a secret. I had never felt more alone. I couldn't tell anyone, not yet. Not my parents, who adored Emily and would struggle to believe she had done something so horrible. Not my coworkers, who would never look at me the same way again if they knew I had been raising another man's children unknowingly. Not even Mark. Especially not Mark. No. Before I confronted Emily, before I confronted him, I needed one more thing. I needed his DNA. I didn't go home right away. After connecting the dots. After seeing Mark's name show up over and over again in our past. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, my mind racing. It still wasn't enough. Sure, I had a gut feeling. Sure, Mark had been there through it all. Too much, maybe. But I needed undeniable proof before I said a word. Before I set fire to my entire life. The DNA he didn't know he gave me. Getting Mark's DNA was easier than I expected. I met him for lunch a few days later, just like we had done hundreds of times before. I played it cool, acted like nothing was wrong. We talked about sports, about work, about nothing. And then, right at the end of the meal, he made the mistake that sealed his fate. He took one last sip of his drink and set it down. His lips on the rim, fingerprints on the glass. When he went to the bathroom, I grabbed the cup, casually wiping my mouth with a napkin as I did. Slipped it into a plastic bag. By the time he came back, it was already secured in my jacket pocket. I smiled, paid the bill, told him we should do this again soon. And then I left, fighting the urge to punch my fist through the nearest wall. The confrontation, her reaction shocked me. That night, after the kids were asleep, I finally did it. I walked into the living room, heart pounding, hands clenched at my sides. Emily was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware that her world was about to collapse. I stood there for a moment, just watching her. Then, finally, I said it. I know. Her head snapped up, confusion flickering across her face. Know what? She asked, feigning innocence. I took a slow, deep breath. The kids. I know they're not mine. Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. I watched as her skin drained of color, her mouth opening, then closing, like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. And that's when I knew. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't confused. She knew. She had always known. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. When were you going to tell me? I asked, my voice deathly calm. She blinked rapidly, shaking her head. It's not. How long? I cut her off. How many years have you been looking me in the eye? Letting me raise someone else's kids, pretending like nothing was wrong. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't want this to happen. I let out a bitter laugh. You didn't want it to happen? That's your excuse. She wiped at her eyes, her breathing shallow. I thought it wouldn't matter. I stared at her, disbelief coursing through my veins. It wouldn't matter? She sniffled. You're their father. In every way that counts. You thought I'd never find out. I finished for her. Silence again. And then she crumbled. Tears, shaking shoulders, hands covering her face as sobs racked her body. I stood there, stone cold, feeling nothing but rage. You don't get to cry, I said. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with guilt and panic. You don't get to sit there and act like the victim, Emily. She opened her mouth, but I wasn't done. You let me believe I was their father. You let me love them like they were my own. And all this time you knew. Her lips trembled. I was scared. Of what? I demanded. Of me finding out? Of the truth coming out? She hesitated. I took a slow step closer. Who is he? She flinched. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. Who's their father, Emily? Her whole body tensed, and for the first time that night, I saw something else flicker across her face. Not regret. Not remorse. Fear. And that's when I knew. She wasn't refusing to answer because she was ashamed. She was refusing to answer because she knew that when I found out, things would be even worse. She refuses to reveal the truth. I took another slow step forward. Say it. She shook her head rapidly. Say his name. Tears streamed down her face, but she stayed silent. That was the moment I realized something important. She wasn't just lying to protect herself. She was protecting him. And the only reason she would do that? It was someone close. Someone we both knew. Mark. The name was poison in my throat, but I didn't say it. Not yet. Because I wasn't going to accuse without proof. Not when I was so close. Instead, I took a deep breath, my hands still clenched into fists. You don't want to tell me? Fine. I'll find out on my own. She shook her head quickly. Please don't do this. Please, just what? I snapped. Forget? Pretend none of this happened. She sobbed. I never wanted to hurt you. I let out a slow, humorless laugh. Well, congratulations. You did. Then I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her crying on the couch, knowing damn well that things were only going to get worse from here. The wait for the DNA test. That night I barely slept. The next morning, I dropped the stolen cup off at a private lab for testing. Mark's DNA would take a few days to process. I didn't know what was worse, waiting for the results, or already knowing what they were going to say. I spent the next few days avoiding Emily as much as I could. We barely spoke beyond what was necessary for the kids. She didn't try to deny what I had accused her of. She didn't try to make excuses. She just waited, the same way I did, as the weight of her betrayal hung between us like a funeral shroud. And then, 5 days later, the call from the lab came in. I answered with shaking hands. The results are in. I swallowed hard. And a pause. And then the words that made my world crash down completely. Yes. Mark is a paternal match for all 3 children. The moment I hung up the phone, the world around me blurred into nothing. I sat there in my car, gripping the steering wheel, Mark's name ringing in my ears like a curse I could never escape. He was their father. Not me. Him. All those years, birthday parties, bedtime stories, first days of school. I had been living a lie. And he had let me. The confrontation, my so-called best friend. I didn't plan it. I didn't rehearse what I was going to say. I just drove straight to his house. My hands clenched so tight around the wheel my knuckles turned white. Mark lived alone, in a modest 2-story house a few miles from mine. I had been there dozens of times before. Cookouts, football Sundays, late-night poker games. He had been one of my closest friends. And the entire time, he had been screwing my wife behind my back. When I pounded on his door, he actually smiled when he opened it. Hey man, what's? Punched him. Hard. He stumbled back, crashing against the wall, clutching his jaw. What the? You lied to me. My voice was like steel, sharp and dangerous. His eyes flickered. Guilt, panic, realization. He knew. He knew exactly why I was here. I stepped inside, slamming the door shut behind me. How long, Mark? How long were you screwing my wife? He wiped his bleeding lip, swallowing hard. Listen, man, don't even try to weasel your way out of this. I have DNA test results. I know the kids are yours. His entire body stiffened. And that's when I saw it. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't confused. He already knew. You son of a... I grabbed the front of his shirt, shoving him against the wall. Wait, he gasped. I didn't want it to happen like this. Like this. I barked out a bitter laugh. You mean you didn't want me to find out? You were fine living a lie as long as I was raising your damn kids. He shut his eyes for a second. I didn't know for sure. Bullshit. Emily. She told me they were mine, but I didn't ask for proof. I shoved him again, my voice shaking. And that makes it better? You got to walk away while I was in the delivery room, cutting the umbilical cord. His jaw tightened, and for a second, I thought he was going to fight back. But instead, he exhaled heavily, slumping against the wall. I was a coward, he admitted. I should have told you years ago, but I didn't want to ruin everything. I stepped back, disgust curling in my stomach. You didn't want to ruin everything? That's funny. Because my life is already ruined. He had nothing to say to that. Emily's next move, playing the victim. When I got home, Emily was in the kitchen, pretending like everything was normal. Like I hadn't just spent the last week uncovering the biggest betrayal of my life. Like I wasn't about to destroy whatever little remained of our marriage. I slammed my keys on the counter. I talked to Mark. She froze. Her shoulders tensed. But when she turned around, her expression was carefully neutral. And you knew, I accused. You knew the kids weren't mine from the start. She swallowed, but there was no shock. No denial. I hoped it wouldn't matter, she said softly. I laughed. A hollow, empty sound. You hoped? You lied to me for over a decade. Emily. You let me believe those kids were mine. Tears welled in her eyes. They are yours. Not biologically, I shot back. Not legally. That doesn't change the fact that you're their father. Her voice cracked, and she stepped closer, her hands shaking. I didn't do this to hurt you. I took a step back, shaking my head. Don't you dare try to make this about you. Her lower lip trembled. I was scared. I was young. I made a mistake, and I didn't know how to fix it. I knew if I told you, you'd leave and... So instead, you trapped me in a lie? She wiped at her tears. I didn't trap you. I gave you a family. I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. You didn't give me a family. You gave me someone else's children and let me believe they were mine. Her breath hitched, and I saw the shift in her expression, the moment she realized that crying wasn't going to work. And that's when she turned on me. You're really going to walk away? She snapped. After everything? After all these years? You're just going to abandon them? Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Because she knew. She knew that no matter how much she had betrayed me, no matter how much I hated her, I still loved those kids. And I wasn't going to leave them. But I sure as hell wasn't going to stay with her. The legal reality. I'm still the father. A few days later, I sat in a lawyer's office, hands clenched on my lap as he delivered the final blow. Legally, you're their father, he said. You signed the birth certificates. You've been raising them their whole lives. Unless you pursue a complicated and expensive case to challenge paternity, the court will hold you financially responsible. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe past the anger. She had won. She had trapped me completely. If I walked away, I would be abandoning them. If I stayed, I would have to co-parent with the woman who betrayed me. I swallowed hard. I don't care about the money. I care about them. The lawyer nodded. Then your best course of action is to establish a custody agreement that keeps you in their lives, but separates you from her as much as possible. I exhaled slowly. Fine. Let's do that. Because no matter how much it hurt, I wasn't leaving my kids. But Emily? I was done with her. Forever. I sat in my car outside the house, staring at the front door like it was a gateway to the ruins of my past life. Inside, my kids were laughing. I could hear them through the open window, their voices full of life, of innocence. They had no idea that their world had already changed, that their father wasn't who they thought he was, that their mother had lied. And yet, they were still my children, not by blood, but by love, by every bedtime story, every scraped knee I had bandaged, every tear I had wiped away. And I wasn't going to abandon them. Emily had stolen the truth from me, but she wasn't going to steal them, too. The divorce, that wasn't a choice. Emily was waiting for me in the living room when I walked in. She had been crying. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale, but she wasn't sobbing anymore. She wasn't begging or apologizing. She was waiting. She knew. I dropped my keys on the counter, took a slow breath, and said it as clearly as I could. I'm filing for divorce. Her face cracked. She inhaled sharply, like I had physically struck her. Please, she whispered, stepping forward. Let's talk about this. Let's try to fix it. I shook my head. It's not fixable. She let out a broken laugh, desperate, grasping. We can go to therapy. We can. No, Emily. My voice was firm, calm, final. Her lip trembled. But the kids. I cut her off. I'm staying in their lives. That made her pause. She blinked at me, confusion flickering in her eyes. You're staying. I'm not leaving them, I said. But I'm leaving you. The words hit like a hammer. She swayed slightly, her breath shaky. You can't just erase everything we've built. I clenched my jaw. You erased it. The moment you lied to me. The moment you let me raise someone else's kids without telling me the truth. Tears spilled down her face. I love you. I exhaled slowly. Then you shouldn't have destroyed me. Silence. And then she broke. She collapsed onto the couch, head in her hands, sobbing. But I didn't comfort her. Not anymore. The new reality, a house divided. Over the next few weeks, I stayed in the house. Not for Emily. For the kids. They didn't know what was happening yet. Not fully. We had agreed to wait before telling them. But they sensed the change. I moved into the guest room. I barely spoke to Emily unless it was about the kids. Meals were silent, tense. She still tried, sometimes, tried to reach me to fix what she had shattered. She would hover in the kitchen while I made coffee. She would linger near me when I sat on the couch. Once, she even brushed her fingers against mine when handing me a plate. I pulled away like I had been burned. And the look on her face? She finally understood. She had lost me. Forever. The kids, the hardest part. One evening, I was sitting on the back porch when Noah, my oldest, came outside. He was quiet for a while, kicking at the wooden deck with his foot. Finally, he looked up at me. Dad. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Yeah, buddy? His brow furrowed. Are you and Mom getting a divorce? My heart stopped. I sat up straighter. Why do you ask? He looked away. You don't eat dinner with us as much anymore. You don't laugh with Mom like you used to. And I heard her crying last night. A sharp pain settled in my chest. I had always known this moment would come. I just wasn't ready. I took a deep breath. Things are going to change, Noah. But I'm not leaving you. I'll always be here. His lip quivered. But you're leaving Mom. I hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, buddy. I am. Tears welled in his eyes. Did we do something wrong? I felt my heart break in two. I reached for him, pulling him into my arms, holding him tighter than I ever had before. No, I whispered. You didn't do anything wrong. This is between me and Mom. And no matter what happens, I will always be your dad. His little body shook as he cried into my chest. And I realized this was the real betrayal. Not what Emily had done to me, what she had done to them. The final divide. A few weeks later, Emily finally accepted it. We worked out a co-parenting agreement. I stayed in the house for now, until we could figure out how to separate without disrupting the kids' lives too much. But she stopped trying to fix things. She stopped hoping. One night, as I walked past the bedroom we once shared, I saw her sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. Her voice was small, fragile. I never wanted to lose you. I paused in the doorway. You lost me a long time ago, Emily, I said quietly. And then I walked away. Life didn't stop. Even after the lies, the betrayal, the unbearable weight of knowing the truth, the world kept moving forward. And so did I. But I wasn't the same. Emily wasn't the same. Nothing in that house felt real anymore. Just a set of routines performed by two people who no longer knew each other. The only thing that mattered now? The kids. They were the only reason I was still there. The only thing keeping me from walking out that front door and never looking back. But even they could sense the difference. A house but not a home. I stayed in the house just like I said I would. For now. Not in the master bedroom. That was Emily's space now. I moved into the guest room, a temporary solution to a permanent wound. Mornings were silent. Nights were colder. Emily stopped trying to fix things. She stopped lingering near me, stopped forcing small talk. She finally understood that there was no going back. She had lost me, forever. And the knowledge of that, It broke her. Emily's downfall. It happened in pieces. First, she put on a brave face. She smiled for the kids, acted like everything was fine. But behind closed doors, she was unraveling. She lost weight. She stopped getting dressed up for the day. She spent long hours in the bedroom, door locked, eyes red from crying. And I didn't comfort her. Not anymore. This was her mess, her choices, and I was done carrying the weight of her guilt. One night, I found her sitting at the kitchen table long after the kids had gone to bed. A half-empty bottle of wine sat next to her. She looked up at me with hollow eyes. "Do you ever think about it?" she whispered. I didn't answer. "About what we had?" she continued, her voice soft. "About how good we were, before she destroyed it. Before she ripped apart the life we built with one unforgivable lie after another." I clenched my jaw. "I don't live in the past, Emily." Her breath hitched, and I saw the way her shoulders shook. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. I turned and walked away. The final conversation with my children. It was Noah again, the oldest, the most aware of what was happening. He came into my room one night, hesitant, shifting on his feet. "Hey, bud," I said, putting my phone down. "Everything okay?" He hesitated, then sat on the edge of the bed. "Are you and Mom ever going to be normal again?" The question sliced through me. I exhaled slowly, choosing my words carefully. "Things will be different," I admitted. "But that doesn't mean I love you any less. That will never change." He nodded slowly, but his lip trembled. "And what about you? Are you gonna leave?" I swallowed past the lump in my throat. "I'm not going anywhere, Noah. I promise." His face crumpled. He let out a shaky breath. "Good," he whispered. And when he hugged me, I held onto him for dear life. The beginning of the end. A few weeks later, Emily made a decision. She knocked on my door one night. Something she never did anymore. "I'm leaving," she said quietly. I blinked. "What?" "I need space," she admitted. "I need time to figure out who I am outside of all this." I studied her for a long moment. She looked tired, defeated, and yet, for the first time in months, there was clarity in her eyes. "Where are you going?" I asked. She sighed. "My sister's, for now. I'll come back for the kids on weekends." I nodded. Not because I agreed. Because I didn't care. Because she had already stopped mattering to me. She left the next morning. No dramatic goodbyes. No final attempts to make me stay. Just a quiet departure from a life she had already destroyed. The final scene moving forward. One night, a few weeks after Emily left, I sat on the couch, watching my kids play. They were laughing, building a pillow fort in the living room, their faces full of light. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I smiled, because I hadn't lost everything. I had lost my marriage. I had lost my best friend. I had lost the life I thought I knew, but I still had them, and that was enough. I wasn't their biological father, but I was their dad, and I always would be, no matter what. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.
See you.